Welcome to the Healthy Half Hour Podcast. We are your hosts, Richard and Karen Inslee.
The Healthy Half Hour Podcast is your resource for all things healthy, and we will be discussing how to make nutrition, fitness and lifestyle choices work for you.
We will be sharing our own personal insights along with research gathered from working in the health and fitness industry for the past 10 years.
Our show is brought to you by the 7 Day Shred, which can be found at 7dayshred.com, and please feel free to visit our podcast website, which can be found at healthyhalfhourpodcast.com.
And now on to today's show.
Hi and welcome back to the Healthy Half Hour Podcast. We've actually missed a week, and because we live in Winnipeg, our summer's so short and we have an awesome garden, we might be actually doing our podcasts once, maybe, every 2 weeks possibly. We're going to see how we can fit everything in, aren't we?
So, yeah, but if it rains, I'll be in doing it.
And we're super excited right now because last night we went to see our national hockey team play round 3, was it, for the...
Go Jets Go.
Yeah, Go Jets Go. So we actually got offered tickets literally about an hour before the game started, and somebody said oh, would you like some tickets? Would you like to come and see the game? It's like, oh, yeah. So I'm sporting my Winnipeg Whiteout Jets shirt, and like I say, we're so excited and just really pumped to do the podcast, but obviously we're all hyper because we won last night.
So if the voices are a little bit hoarse today, then remember we were screaming our heads off last night.
What was the decibel count?
114, I think, at one point. So
yeah, it was very loud.
I think that was just us two. So today's podcast, we're going to talk about thyroid. With anything like we've spoke about thyroids, or we've spoken about other bodily systems that, again, people can have medications for. We're not replacing what your doctor's told you, what your endocrine specialist has told you in any way, shape or form. Again, we're just going to kind of look at things, maybe some things that your doctor hasn't told you, maybe some things that you can just try. Again, if you are taking medication for it. But again, if you're not sure about any of this, just do talk to your doctor about it.
And we're all about looking at the cause, not the symptoms. So what we're hoping to do on this podcast, especially all of them, is just to basically, is it actually a symptom that is it the thyroid that's a problem, or is it just something else that's actually causing the symptoms that kind of relate to thyroid issues?
Yes, if you're taking thyroxine or something like that, don't stop because we said it, it might be something else. So again, have a look, talk to your practitioner. Again, these things are here we're just going to discuss it to kind of make you think. The thing is with the thyroid as well, it is part of the endocrine system, and the endocrine system is basically the hormonal system of the body. It's very, very, very complicated, and we're just going to try and skim across the top as much as we can. We don't want to get too deep and disappear down a rabbit hole with this because, again, it can just go on and on and on and on and on. And as we've said, everybody's different. So, we may suggest something here that you want to try, and it may just be the thing that kind of perks your thyroid up if it's a little underactive.
And I just wanted to share, I'll share a little bit later, just some of my...
tease.
Oh, yeah, I know. Some of my issues with a supposed thyroid condition I got diagnosed with a few years ago.
We're just leaving your issues at the thyroid. But,
so you'll pay for that later.
Oh, please, call me mummy. So thyroid, what is it? So basically, it's an endocrine gland, like I say, which is part of the hormonal system, which is situated in your neck. So for guys, it's kind of around the Adam's apple area. Same for girls, but how the cartilage is slightly different in the neck for men, which is, again, why we end up with kind of that Adam's apple. And what it does, it secretes those thyroid hormones. And one thing with thyroid hormones, they can affect almost every cell in your body. So all those trillions of cells in the body, majority of them will actually listen to thyroid hormone. So it's very important that it works correctly and it does its job. Basically, there's two parts to thyroid. There's T3, which I've been practicing this all afternoon, because I always just say T3 as everybody else does. So it's triiodothyronine, and T4, which is thyroxine. And basically, the building blocks for both of those are iodine and tyrosine. So what does it affect? Well, basically, it affects the metabolic rate, it affects protein synthesis, and also it can affect kind of how the breakdown of blood glucose and fat metabolism. So once your body starts getting these hormones in the system, these are the things that happen. But it's not just the thyroid that actually is part of this system. Other parts of your brain are actually in this system, and it starts in the hypothalamus, which is in the kind of middle center of your brain. And the thyrotropin releasing hormone, which sends a little signal, again, which is another hormone, and that sends that signal to the anterior pituitary gland. And from the anterior pituitary gland, then basically thyroid stimulating hormone is released, and that goes to the thyroid. And what thyroid stimulating hormone does is tell the thyroid how much T4 and T3 to release into the system. So again, the body, it's responding to a feedback loop that's coming back up into the brain and telling the pituitary, the hypothalamus, which tells the pituitary how much TSH to release. And so basically how much the thyroid needs activating. So the thyroid activation, basically, it kind of works on your what Balsam metabolic rate. So we've discussed Balsam metabolic rate before. And what it is, if you can't remember from previous podcasts, is it's kind of your body at rest. So if you were just lying on the couch or lying in bed, it's how many calories, how much energy you're actually using, kind of your metabolic effect, which is, again, all the energy systems in your body that go to create energy are actually working when you're at rest. So while you're actually moving, while you're walking, while you're working, while you're exercising, while you're running, your thyroid still works, but it kind of goes onto the back burner a little bit. So if you think of your car driving along and you're going along 50 kilometers an hour somewhere, 30 miles an hour if you're in the UK, and you come up to a traffic light. When you come up to a traffic light, you're sitting at the traffic light at idle, so the engine's just ticking over. In the body system, that's when really the thyroid and the thyroid T3, T4 would actually be working at its optimum. So once you set off from the traffic light again and you're moving, again, you're off idle. So a lot of other cellular processes become active. So again, thyroid isn't needed as much in that. So the basic thing, what I'm getting at, is the more you move, the less you're going to rely on your thyroid. But obviously for 8 hours a night when you're asleep, you're going to rely on it. So it does have a large effect on our daily life. And again, if you're got a sedentary job and you're basically only moving for a couple of 3 hours a day, there's 21 hours when your thyroid is kind of taking over. But if you've got more of an active job, you've got more of an active lifestyle, then again, the thyroid isn't necessarily working all the time.
And you just mentioned about the hypothalamus and the thyrotropin releasing hormone. And basically, if the hypothalamus isn't working properly and actually producing enough thyrotropin releasing hormone, which signals the pituitary gland.
I think we could say TSH from now.
Yeah, I think the TRH and TSH, if it's not manufacturing of TRH, which signals the pituitary to produce the TSH, if the amount of, I don't know, I prefer saying thyrotropin releasing hormone.
You go for it, girl.
Yeah. If it's not, the process isn't working properly, then basically it's not going to produce enough TSH, and for the thyrotropin releasing hormone to be effective, it actually needs serotonin and dopamine, which are both neurotransmitters in the brain. So wanted to mention this because if somebody's on SSRIs, then serotonin
serotonin reuptake inhibitors.
What does the other S stand for?
Silly.
So if you're on SSRIs, and a lot of people are, then you, like we said at the beginning, you could be exhibiting like thyroid conditions, but it might not actually be anything to do with like thyroid conditions. It could be because you've got dysregulation elsewhere. And when it comes to TSH production, there's a lot of things that actually will interfere with it, and stress and inflammation are one of them. And you're going to touch on obviously T4 and T3, because like the more stress, your body is actually subjected to, the less your body's able to convert that T4 to T3.
Yeah, so out of the thyroid gland itself, it actually produces more T4 than it does T3. So it produces about 90% more T4 than it does T3, when really T3 is the active part of thyroid. So T4 is easily absorbed into the organs and where it needs to go into the cells, and then it's actually converted into T3. And so again, that's being the active part. So the conversion, like Karen says, from T4 to T3 relies on certain enzymes. We're not going to bore you with them right now.
Aww.
But that enzymatic action... Again,
we're just going to bore them with other stuff instead.
Too right. That enzymatic action, I've spoken about enzymatic actions before, can get blunted by stress, so by cortisol itself. So another hormone, cortisol, can kind of stick its nose in and blunt some of that. So again, if you've got a stressful life, or you've got a stressful job, or something's going on in the family that's kind of stressing you out, that conversion from T4 to T3 can be blunted. So again, it seems like your thyroid isn't working properly, but your thyroid's working okay. It's just downstream of that thyroid where it needs that conversion. It's just not happening.
And a lot of the times it's like, chronically elevated levels of cortisol.
Yes.
Caused from stress.
Yes.
Affect that T4 to T3.
Oh, 100%. And again, with that T4 and T3, the actual T4 and T3 are actually bound to something called thyroxine binding globulin. So that actually
That's
floats.
A big word.
I know. So TBG, although I'm probably not going to mention it again. So once it's bound to TBG, that goes around the system. So the ones in the system that actually do what they're supposed to do, or can affect cells more than that, because that's not bound, are actually free T3 and free T4. And why doesn't your doctor check for that? We don't know. That's a mystery.
Could be due to dollars.
Could be due to dollars indeed. So
could be.
Yeah. So again, we're going to talk about testing and stuff, and again, testing for TSH, T3, T4, free T3, free T4, and Uncle Tom Cobley and all, and the rest of them.
And I said at the beginning that I was going to just refer to something that happened to me. And again, like we say at the beginning of every podcast, we're not doctors and we're not telling you to do anything in particular. But I actually got diagnosed several years ago with something called Graves' disease. And Graves' disease is basically a precursor to hyperthyroidism, not hypo. So hyperthyroidism. And basically
So anything, just putting in, anything hyper, HYPER, is an overactive thyroid. Anything HYPO is an underactive. So whatever in medical terms you hear hyper, it's too much, and whatever you hear hypo is too small. Why they'd have two words that sound the same when you say them all together with another word, I don't know. But hyperthyroidism and hypothyroidism sound very similar. So just to clarify that.
And my blood work was coming back with elevated levels of T3, T4, not within the optimal range, and my TSH was through the floor. And I was sent to see a specialist, so every 3 months I would go and have my blood work done, and I get patted on the head, given a prescription. And me personally, I'm not good at taking drugs, and my actual GP, my doctor, knows this. And we've got an awesome doctor, like we've said, and him and his wife actually don't want their patients on drugs. But I was usually, as I do, I'm a questioner. Drives you insane, doesn't it? I question absolutely... Insaner, yeah. I question absolutely everything. So we went to actually see some biochemists, nutrition scientists do a presentation, and I could never get answers on Graves' disease because I said, well, I don't have the symptoms that are associated with it, but my blood work was...
What are the symptoms that are associated with Graves' disease?
Graves' disease, like bulging eyes, like racing heart, hair loss, sudden weight loss.
Oh.
Yeah. So, well, that's just to name a few. And so we saw this guy do this presentation, and I won't mention his name. Because we don't want people bombarding him, because he does this as kind of a hobby. I couldn't get any answers about Graves' disease, and I said to him about it, and he said egg whites and dairy, and I looked at him and went, what? He says take eggs and dairy out of your diet for 30 days and go back to have your blood work done. me being the usual, I'm not very good at taking medication. I stopped taking my medication, but not that I was very good at taking it anyway. And I took eggs and dairy out of my diet for 30 days. And at the end of the 30 days, I was due for my regular blood work at the hospital anyway. So I went and had it done. And I have to admit that I was a little bit nervous when I actually went to get my results because I'd not been taking my medication for 30 days. And I actually have to say that my T3 and my T4 went up, but probably 0.2. Like, it was so insignificant. And I went to my doctor and I said, look, I'm not taking the medication anymore. If you think my thyroid blood work is an issue, I will go back on it under protest. But he said, fine. And he just keeps control of like my blood work. And with that in mind, I recently, the last 3 years, I've been going into menopause, and I'm actually in menopause now. And when you actually begin to go into menopause, your thyroid markers and blood work can actually elevate. And this is actually pretty normal. And one thing I've noticed that we had our medical done just before we went away in October, November, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Just before we went to England.
Yeah.
And my thyroid markers are actually, now that I'm in menopause, are actually back to normal. So hormonally, like, and our estrogen levels in females can actually be very, what's the word I'm looking for? It actually is a factor into how our thyroid performs, and and I'll go into this afterwards, like this, the increase in estrogen can actually present certain like, results in your blood work. And so when me being a questioner as well, I was talking to a friend of mine not long ago, and we were, having coffee, and she was saying that she'd been to a naturopath. And before she'd said that she'd been to a naturopath, she was actually saying, again, very symptomatic of hypothyroidism and Graves' disease. She says, like, I've lost like 10 pounds in the last month, and my hair's starting to fall out, and my heart rate's like really racing, and I feel like I've got lumps in my throat. And she says, I've been to this like naturopath, and she's given me some supplements. And I said, well, what has she given you? And she says, well, she got me to take iodine. And I said, well, why has she got you on iodine? And she goes, I don't know. And me being a questioner, I'm like, well, go back and ask her, because the symptoms of hypothyroidism that she was experiencing were indicative of excess iodine in the diet. So her naturopath had actually put her on iodine. And by the sounds of it, it was actually presenting hypothyroid conditions because she got too much iodine in the diet. And another issue when it comes to nutrition is that quite a reasonable percentage of celiac people actually present with hypothyroid conditions. And it's actually the gluten that can cause problems with regard to autoimmune conditions.
Dan, dan, dan.
Dan, dan, dan. And I was reading something...
Damn you, gluten.
Yeah, I was reading something earlier, and I actually thought I'm going to use that in this podcast, because a lot of people won't take like allergenic foods out of their diet and things that they're intolerant to. But this article that I was reading saying like, what's more important, the bagel or your thyroid? And I thought that was such a good analogy, because a lot of celiacs actually were presenting with hypothyroid conditions, and it was the gluten. So this is undiagnosed celiac.
So from that point of view, would somebody who's maybe not full-blown celiac but has got like a gluten sensitivity, would they fall in the same bracket?
Yeah, because like you're actually creating imbalances in your immune system. Sorry, I can't get all my words out today. Obviously, I must be still so excited from the game last night.
Mm-hmm. Go Jets, go!
Yeah, go Jets, go! So there was a study done that it showed that people were presenting hypothyroid conditions, but they were undiagnosed celiac patients, but also people who have an intolerance to gluten were also presenting with hypothyroid conditions as well. And another
So
issue,
give up gluten for 30 days, see how you look, feel and perform.
exactly, yeah.
Holy cats, this is tough.
And unlike me, we're not saying stop taking your medication. That's just me, because I'm just one of those sort of people.
Rebel without a clue.
And also, blood sugar dysregulations can disrupt your immune system and present as autoimmune disease. So there's a lot to be said for the food that we put in our mouth and how it actually creates imbalances with regard to our immune system. And as we said at the beginning, you can be presenting with hyper or hypothyroid conditions, but it's not actually the thyroid or the hypothalamus or the systems that are the problem.
And again, not necessarily, no. I mean, there's a lot of pieces to this puzzle. And I mean, even if you use Dr. Google and look, and I mean, there's so many different
And he's so
things.
reliable, like Dr.
Oh,
Oz.
100%. So, I mean, it's just looking at that and again, seeing what kind of presents with you and having a look into it. And like I say, like Karen says, it's not necessarily that, we're just, you can give you some thyroxine and it's going to fix it. Because again, if your doctors put you on thyroxine and you don't really feel much different, then maybe that's not the thing.
Question him.
And ask questions. And again, this is why I've said at the start of the podcast is basically, this is why we're doing this again, to kind of make people think, and then just, just kind of think about the situation, kind of think about what's going off. And again, if you've got symptomologies of, like you say, hypo or hypothyroidism, then we'll look into it. Obviously, don't be a hypochondriac, but it's certainly worth a thought if things don't seem to be working as they should in your body.
And if you have a genuine hyperthyroid condition, so that's where your heart rate is, your immune system basically is being like stimulated in excess, and so you're going to find those heart palpitations, then if it's a genuine hyperthyroidism condition, then you don't want to be taking certain supplements, which a lot of them are great and a lot of them are found in weight loss products. So things like echinacea, licorice root, green tea, resveratrol, curcumin, ashwagandha. I actually want to take that because it just sounds such like a really neat word.
Good plan.
What?
Good plan.
Yeah. But a lot of these are awesome supplements and herbs, but what they're going to do is overstimulate your immune system. And if you're genuinely hyperthyroid, your immune system's already overstimulated. So you don't want to be taking any of these supplements and herbs because they're going to overstimulate your immune system even further, and then even elevate those like heart palpitations and issues with regard to like your overall health.
And one of the main causes actually of hypothyroidism, which is again is an underactive thyroid, is just low iodine in your diet. So again, if that's it, and it ranges really depending on where the food's grown. I mean, I know there are maps of Europe and the US and Canada where like vegetables are grown in the ground, and there's actually areas where they know where the iodine is low in that area. So that food itself will not naturally take up that iodine. And believe it or not, one plant that has actually got a lot of iodine in it is like sea kelp, so seaweed. And that's really high in iodine. But you can Google kind of plants that are high in iodine and kind of have a look at that. Not going to say it's going to be the fix-all, and you can actually get kelp in supplement form too. But do be aware, obviously, if you're on thyroxine or a medication or something like that, just adding more iodine into your system will, not necessarily help you. I mean, it might be the fix-all for somebody, or for other people might not.
And for the longest time, people with hypothyroidism have been advised to avoid goitrogenic vegetables. And goitrogens are basically foods that further deplete the health of your thyroid. And they include things like broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, kale, mustard greens, bok choy.
And I'm sure you've heard, like, with people having goiters on their thyroid, it's like a lump on it. So again, what goitrogenic foods can do, they can actually stimulate goiters to actually grow on the thyroid. And again, this is what Karen's just discussing now. And
this recent study has actually said, it's load of bull, basically.
Wow.
You don't have to avoid those foods because they've kind of like myth busted that goitrogen issue with regard to goitrogen foods.
And I think I saw something on it. It was what they were saying. I mean, to actually get a goitrogenic effect from, I think it was broccoli or something like that, you'd have to eat like 6 pounds of it. In a sitting,
if
like
you're a bodybuilder, you probably do.
In most days. So I mean, yeah, it does. They do have goitrogenic effects, but again, you've got to eat a wheelbarrow full to actually make a difference, and people don't do that. And again, it's just part of that balanced diet.
So I just want to summarize just a few points with regard to thyroid health. So a low functioning thyroid. So hypothyroidism could be possible iodine deficiency.
Could be.
Could be a tyrosine deficiency or an autoimmune attack on your thyroid. And if you've got an over-functioning thyroid, so hyperthyroidism, it's typically due to an attack on the thyroid, such as that Graves' disease that I was mentioning. And do some research of your own on Graves' disease. But if you actually do some research, some of the symptoms can apply to so many different conditions and health issues. So that's why I wanted to do this podcast, because when you get diagnosed and prescribed thyroid medications, it might not necessarily be the thyroid that's the problem. A low functioning pituitary gland actually can be as a result of high cortisol levels that we mentioned.
More stress.
Yeah, more stress, inflammation, or even infections in the body. And an underconversion of T4 to T3, which Richard mentioned earlier. Again, we're going to go back to that high cortisol, inflammation again, selenium deficiency, and also poor liver health. You can actually have an overconversion of T4 to T3, and that actually can be pretty relevant to elevated testosterone in the body. So probably more relevant to guys on that one. Elevated thyroid...
Or girls with deep voices.
Yeah. Like Groot.
Oh, God, I knew that was coming. I just knew that was
this
coming.
is garbage. No, sorry, we can't not have a podcast now.
Don't drag me into it.
It's so fluffy!
I'll cut that out.
No.
Come on, we just dropped to five listeners now.
We're back down to single digits now.
They're switching off in droves.
Elevated thyroid binding globulin can actually be due to elevated levels of estrogen, and a decrease in your thyroid binding globulin can actually be due to an elevation of testosterone, and also again going back to that liver health. And there's also the thyroid receptor site resistance. So again, inflammation, that can actually be vitamin A deficiency, going back to that high stress and high cortisol and high homeocysteine. So there's a list of reasons as to why your blood markers can actually be showing that you've got a thyroid condition, but you've got to look at the cause and address just
try and dig down into the root and try and get to the bottom of that. So one thing, again, we're just getting towards the end of the podcast now, just to wrap it up. And one thing we've researched, and again, a lot of natural health practitioners have mentioned. Obviously, the mainstay don't seem to be this far down the rabbit hole with this one, is TSH levels. So, I mean, if you go to your doctor and get your thyroid checked as part of your regular blood panel at the end of the year, the actual thyroid TSH, the normal range is 0.4 to 4 international units, is it?
International units
per litre. So, I mean, that's a large range, 0.4 to 4. So, and again, in the natural kind of health world, and we've looked at this for quite a while, most people say if you're reading over 1.9, then you've got a problem. I mean, your doctor will basically, if it's under 4 and it's not flagged, they won't do anything. But just for, and again, this is just kind of a heads up. If you're at 2.5 or something like that, you may have some subclinical, some underlying issue going on that's not brought it up there yet. But again, from the readings we've looked at and what people have researched, that basically anything over that kind of 1.9 is kind of indicative of something's going wrong, and maybe nothing happening yet, but you kind of maybe need to have a little look at that and see kind of if you can start fixing things or making dietary or lifestyle changes that reducing inflammation, reducing stress and all those other things. Again, then have another look at it and see if they make a difference. So with that, we'll wrap this one up. Again, we didn't go too far into it, and I mean, you may need to re-listen to a couple of bits again as we go through those large names and stuff, and like Karen just summarising those issues at the end. Next time on the podcast, we're going to ask what the scale didn't say. It's something we come up against a lot all the time. Against probably being the wrong word, but it's something we have to deal with a lot of the time. And again, what didn't the scale say?
It didn't say go Jets go.
Oh, there you go. See you then.
That's all we have time for right now, but we do hope that you join us for our next show. And if you want to contribute to an upcoming show by suggesting a topic that you would like us to discuss in more detail, then hop over to our website, healthyhalfhourpodcast.com, subscribe to our podcast and submit your suggestions. The Healthy Half Hour Podcast was brought to you by the 7 Day Shred, and don't forget to share our details with your friends and review our show. Until next time, thanks for listening.